My husband said his mistress was more important than our children, and I made him prove it. I was married to Lance for 12 years, and we had 2 children, a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. Everything was normal until he started working late every Thursday. He claimed the company had these new weekly strategy meetings that lasted until midnight. I didn't question it because he was always ambitious about getting promoted. He would come home smelling of cologne instead of his usual coffee scent, but I figured he was trying to impress the bosses. Then our daughter, Mia, mentioned that Dad had picked up a woman from school during dismissal last week. It was Mrs. Rivera, the new art teacher who had just transferred from another district. Mia said Dad gave her a ride and they were laughing a lot. When I asked Lance about it, he said her car had broken down and he was just being nice, making me feel crazy for even bringing it up. The Thursday meetings continued for 3 months, and then Lance started having Saturday golf trips with clients and Sunday brunches with investors. Our son Jake asked why Dad never came to his soccer games anymore, and Lance replied that making money for the family was more important than watching kids run around. That hurt, but I let it go. One Thursday, I decided to surprise Lance at the office with dinner since he'd be stuck in meetings. The security guard said Lance had left at 5 p.m. as usual. There were no Thursday meetings, he never had them. I drove around for an hour trying to process that. Then I went to Mrs. Rivera's apartment complex because something in my gut just knew. Her car was in the visitor parking lot. I sat there for 3 hours until he came out. When he got home, I confronted him. He didn't even deny it. He actually said I should be grateful he'd found Gloria because she made him happy, which in turn made him a better father. He said, "When I'm happy, everyone benefits." I asked him how long it had been going on and he said, 6 months ever since her welcome party at the school, where I introduced you to. The next morning, Lance told the kids he had a special friend who made him smile, and that they would meet her soon. Jake asked if she was the reason Dad was missing his games. Lance said Gloria was very important to him, and that they would understand when they were older. Mia started to cry and Lance told her to stop being selfish. That weekend he brought Gloria to Jake's soccer game, introducing her to other parents as his colleague. While I was standing right there, she wore a tight dress to a kid's soccer game and kept touching Lance's arm. When Jake scored a goal, he looked up at the stands and saw his father kissing Gloria instead of watching. Jake just stood on the field, confused, but Lance missed the moment entirely. The following week, Lance announced that Gloria would be joining us for family dinner every Friday, claiming the kids needed to get used to her since she would be around permanently. When I said absolutely not, he said I didn't have a vote because Gloria made him feel alive, and the kids needed to see what true love looked like. He actually said our marriage was a good example of settling, and Gloria was an example of passion. At the first dinner, Gloria sat in my spot, and when Mia said that was Mommy's chair, Gloria said, "Sometimes change is good for everyone." Lance agreed, telling Mia to be respectful. Gloria spent the dinner talking about her travels and her art, while the kids barely touched their food. She asked them to call her Glow. Jake said he'd prefer not to call her anything, and Lance sent him to his room without dessert. Gloria started coming over more often and redecorating things, saying the house needed more sophistication. She threw away the kids' drawings from the fridge because it was all too cluttered. She told Mia her drawings were amateurish and that she could teach her real techniques. When Mia said she liked her drawings the way they were, Gloria told Lance I was raising rude children, and Lance made Mia apologize. Then came Jake's birthday. I had planned a party at the trampoline park with his whole class. The morning of, Lance said Gloria thought that was too chaotic and they had arranged something better. They took the kids to an art museum. Jake spent his 10th birthday staring at paintings he didn't understand while Gloria lectured about brushstrokes. His friends went to the trampoline park without him, and he cried himself to sleep. That's when Lance said it. I confronted him for ruining Jake's birthday, and he said Gloria's cultural enrichment was more important than some loud party. I told him the children's happiness should come first. He looked me straight in the eye and said that Gloria was more important than the children because she made him the man who was capable of providing for them, and without her, he'd be miserable and useless to anyone. He said the kids would thank him for it one day. I knew in that moment exactly what I had to do. I spent that night at the kitchen table with an old notebook, writing down everything I could remember. Jake's soccer games where Lance was a no-show, starting with the first one he missed in March. Mia's school art show where she kept looking at the door, waiting for the father who never arrived. The time Gloria threw Jake's drawing off the fridge and Mia cried for an hour. Every cruel comment Gloria made about my children's art being amateurish. Every single moment Lance chose Gloria over them, ordered them to be respectful to her, or sent them to their rooms for standing up for themselves. My hand was shaking as I wrote. The anger made the pen press so hard into the paper that some words tore through the page. I filled 12 pages with dates, times, and exact words. The worst thing Lance said got a page all to itself in capital letters. Gloria is more important than the children because she makes me the man who can provide for them. I wrote it 3 times so I wouldn't forget how he looked at me when he said it. The next morning I woke up at 5 a.m. I couldn't sleep anymore. Lance was still asleep, snoring as if nothing was wrong, as if he hadn't just destroyed our family. I waited until I heard the shower turn on. Then I went into his home office. The file cabinet wasn't even locked. I took out bank statements, credit card bills, investment accounts, and his work calendar, which showed there were never any Thursday meetings scheduled. My phone's camera clicked over and over, my hand steadier now that I had a plan. I photographed everything, sending it all to a new email address I made on my phone at 4 a.m. Evidence he couldn't delete, couldn't explain away, couldn't use to make me feel crazy. The work schedule was the best part, printed from the company portal with the official logo, showing he left at 5 p.m. every Thursday for the last 6 months. No meetings, just lies. At 6 a.m. I called Wynn, my best friend from college. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep. I asked if the kids and I could stay with her for a few days while I sorted things out. She didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. She just told me to pack our bags and come over right now. That made me cry, standing in my kitchen at 6 a.m., because someone actually cared about protecting my children. I packed 3 suitcases quickly, throwing in clothes, toothbrushes, the kids' favorite stuffed animals, Mia's art supplies, Jake's soccer ball, things that would make them feel safe. Lance came downstairs at 7:30, hair still wet, scrolling on his phone before he even looked at me. I told him calmly that the kids and I were going to spend the weekend at Wynn's because we needed some space. He barely looked up, his thumbs flying across the screen. He said that was fine because he had plans with Gloria anyway, as if I had just said we were going to the grocery store instead of leaving him. He walked out the door without asking why we needed space, without asking if the kids were okay, without looking at me at all. At Wynn's house, I set the kids up with movies in the living room, cartoons they loved that made them laugh. They seemed happy to be in a different place, a place where Gloria wasn't. I sat at Wynn's kitchen table with my laptop and searched for divorce lawyers. I read reviews for 2 hours, compared rates, and took notes on which one specialized in custody cases. 5 lawyers made my list. All women, all with reviews mentioning they were tough in court. One review said Jillian Rowe had helped a mother prove parental alienation and win primary custody. I highlighted that name 3 times. Monday morning, I dropped the kids off at school. I hugged them a little extra long. I promised I would pick them up early. Then I drove to Jillian's office downtown, a small brick building with her name on a brass plaque outside. The receptionist led me to a conference room with a large window. Jillian walked in 5 minutes later, tall, with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through me. She sat down and told me to start from the beginning. I talked for 40 minutes straight, telling her everything while she took notes in flawless cursive. When I was done, she put down her pen, looked me in the eye and said, "We can protect your children." Those exact words. I almost cried again. Jillian explained that Lance's own words about Gloria being more important than his kids would destroy him in a custody battle. She said, "Judges hate parents who put their love affairs above their children, especially when there's proof of the mistress being cruel to the kids." She told me we needed to be smart and careful, gathering more evidence while I acted like I was trying to work things out. "Judges like parents who try to fix their marriages," she said. "Even when the marriage is obviously over. We have to play the game, you understand?" I hired her on the spot. I wrote a check from my personal savings account that Lance didn't know existed. Money I'd been putting away from my part-time job at the library, just a few hundred a month for years. We made a plan together at that conference table. Document everything that happened from now on, get the kids into therapy so a professional could see the damage and write reports for the court, and wait for Lance to keep choosing Gloria over the kids because he would. Jillian said that last part with complete certainty, as if she had seen 100 men just like Lance. She probably had. That afternoon, I picked the kids up from school at 2 p.m. instead of 3 p.m. I told them we were going for ice cream. We sat at a table outside the shop, them with chocolate cones, me with nothing because my stomach was in knots. I gently explained that Mommy and Daddy were having big problems, and that we might not all live together soon. Mia asked if it was because of Gloria. I said yes. She looked relieved instead of sad, her whole face relaxing like I just told her good news. That broke my heart more than anything Lance had done, to see my 10-year-old daughter relieved that her family was ending. Jake asked if he would still have to see Gloria if we didn't live with Dad anymore. His voice was small and scared, ice cream dripping down his hand. I promised him I would do everything in my power to protect them both from her. He dropped his cone and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, his little arms around my neck, clinging like I might disappear. I held him back and realized my kids had been waiting for me to do something to protect them, to choose them instead of keeping the peace. They had been waiting for months while I tried to make it work, and I had failed them by waiting so long. I went online that night after the ice cream, after the kids were finally asleep, and searched for family therapists who worked with children going through a divorce. I needed someone who understood what my kids were facing, someone who could help them, and also document what was happening for the court. I read websites for over an hour, looking at credentials and reviews, trying to find the right fit. One name kept coming up in positive reviews. Curtis Walker, a therapist who specialized in helping children process parental affairs and family breakdowns. The reviews said he was gentle with kids but thorough in his documentation, which was exactly what I needed. I called his office the next morning before the kids were awake. I explained to the receptionist that I had 2 children, 10 and 7, dealing with their father's affair and the mistress's cruelty towards them. I said I needed someone who could help the kids, but also provide documentation for custody proceedings. She was quiet for a moment, then said Curtis had openings later that week and would be happy to help. She scheduled Mia for Wednesday afternoon and Jake for Thursday, back-to-back appointments so I wouldn't have to make multiple trips. I thanked her and hung up, feeling like I had taken one more step toward protecting my children. That same morning Jillian called me. She said staying at my friend's house looked like I was abandoning the marital home, which could hurt my custody case. Judges don't like it when one parent leaves the house with the kids because it looks like you're trying to keep them from the other parent, even if that parent doesn't care. She told me to go back home immediately and document everything that happened there. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to see Lance or have the kids around Gloria again, but I understood the strategy. We packed up our things at Wynn's that afternoon and I drove home. Lance's car was in the driveway when we arrived, which surprised me because it was only 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. I got the kids inside and started unpacking while they went to their rooms. Lance came downstairs around 5 p.m. He glanced at us like he had barely noticed we were gone and went to the kitchen to make coffee. He didn't ask where we'd been or if the kids were okay. He just made his coffee and went back to his office upstairs. That evening around 6 p.m. the doorbell rang. I opened it and Gloria walked in without waiting for an invitation, carrying a bag of takeout food. Lance came downstairs and kissed her right in front of me and the kids. Then he announced they had brought dinner for everyone. I pulled out my phone and took timestamp pictures of her in our home, of Lance kissing her in our doorway, of the 2 of them setting out dinner like they owned the place. I made sure the timestamps were clear and sent them to Jillian immediately. Dinner was worse than I expected. Gloria sat at the table and immediately started watching Mia eat, making faces every time my daughter took a bite. Halfway through the meal, Gloria put her fork down and looked at Mia with a fake expression of concern. She said Mia needed to work on her table manners, that the way she held her fork was all wrong and she chewed too loudly. She actually said my 10-year-old daughter needed etiquette lessons, as if Mia was some kind of project that needed fixing. Lance jumped in immediately, agreeing with everything Gloria said, nodding his head like she was absolutely right. He told Mia that Gloria was just trying to help her become more sophisticated, that she should be grateful for the attention. I watched my daughter's face crumble. I saw her eyes fill with tears that she was trying so hard not to let fall. Mia put her fork down and stared at her plate, not eating another bite, just sitting there trying not to cry. I smiled politely at Gloria, said something neutral about how every family has different styles, and made mental notes of every word for Jillian. I noted the time, what was said exactly, how Lance backed Gloria without hesitation, and how Mia reacted. I would write it all down the second the kids were in bed. After dinner, I got the kids ready for bed, reading to Jake and tucking Mia in, making sure they felt safe, even though I knew they didn't. As soon as their doors were closed and I heard their breathing settle into sleep, I went back downstairs. Lance was on the couch watching TV with Gloria curled up next to him. I stood in the doorway and told him clearly that Gloria was not welcome in our home until we had worked through our marital issues. I kept my voice calm and reasonable, exactly like Jillian had told me to. Lance looked at me and laughed. He actually laughed like I had told a joke. He said there was nothing to work out because he was happy with Gloria, and I needed to accept that she was part of our lives now. He said it so casually, as if he were talking about the weather, as if our marriage and our children meant nothing. Gloria smirked at me from the couch, and Lance put his arm around her. I had my phone in my pocket recording everything, the microphone pointed toward them. I let him talk, let him say everything about how Gloria made him happy, and how I just needed to get over it, and accept the new reality. I recorded every word, then excused myself and went upstairs to email the audio file to Jillian before I went to sleep. The next day, I drove to Jillian's office with the recording on my phone. I sat in the conference room and played it for her, watching her face as she listened to Lance dismiss our marriage and tell me to accept his mistress. When it was over, Jillian smiled. Not a happy smile, but a satisfied one. She said Lance was making our case for us by being so obvious about his priorities, so blatant in choosing Gloria over everything. She told me to let him continue, to keep bringing Gloria around, to keep saying these things because every word and every action was evidence. She said we should let him carry on while we quietly built our case, gathering everything we needed to show a judge exactly who Lance had become. I felt relieved and enraged at the same time, relieved that we were building a strong case, but enraged that I had to document my husband destroying our family. Jillian told me the therapy appointments with Curtis were perfectly timed, that having a professional assess the children would be powerful proof of the damage Lance was causing. Wednesday afternoon, I picked Mia up from school early and took her to Curtis Walker's office. The building was small and quiet, with a waiting room that had children's books and toys. Curtis came out to meet us, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a calm voice. He shook Mia's hand and told her they were just going to talk, and maybe draw some pictures, nothing scary or hard. I waited in the lobby while they went into his office, scrolling on my phone and trying not to worry. After 45 minutes, Curtis brought Mia back out. She looked tired but okay, not upset. Curtis asked to speak with me privately for a moment, and I followed him back to his office while Mia waited with the receptionist. He said the session went well, that Mia had opened up about feeling replaced by Gloria, and how her father didn't pay attention to her anymore. He said she talked about how Gloria threw away her art and criticized everything she did, and how Lance always took Gloria's side. Curtis said the emotional neglect was clear and concerning, and he would document everything carefully for any potential court involvement. He asked me to bring Jake in tomorrow and said he would start building a full picture of what these children were going through. On Thursday, I brought Jake to the same office. He was more nervous than Mia, asking if he had to talk about Dad and Gloria. I told him he could talk about whatever he wanted, that Curtis was just there to help him feel better. Jake went into the office holding Curtis's hand, looking small and scared. That session was longer, almost an hour, and when they came out, Jake looked exhausted. Curtis asked to speak with me again, and this time his face was more serious. He said Jake's session was more difficult because Jake didn't have the words for his feelings yet, being only 7. But Jake had drawn a picture during their time together, and Curtis showed it to me. The drawing showed our family, but Lance and Gloria were on one side holding hands, and the three of us were on the other side with a thick black line separating the two groups. Jake had drawn the line over and over, making it dark and heavy, creating a wall between his father and the rest of us. Curtis said the drawing spoke volumes about how Jake understood the family division, how he saw his father choosing Gloria over him, his sister, and me. He said he would keep the drawing in his files and continue to document both children's progress and distress. I started keeping a detailed journal of every interaction after that. When Lance missed Jake's soccer practice on Saturday because he was taking Gloria to dinner downtown, I wrote it down with the date and time. When Lance told Mia he couldn't make it to her school art exhibit because it was the same night as Gloria's gallery opening, and obviously Gloria's event was more important, I documented his exact words and Mia's reaction. When Lance promised to take the kids to the park on Sunday but spent the day with Gloria instead, leaving them sitting by the door waiting for him until I finally told them he wasn't coming, I wrote down every detail. I took pictures of the kids' disappointed faces, of Lance's texts canceling plans, of the times he said he'd be home but showed up 6 hours late smelling of Gloria's perfume. I created a file on my computer with everything organized by date, every broken promise and every choice he made that hurt our children. Jillian told me this documentation would be powerful in court, showing a pattern of neglect and broken trust that no judge could ignore. 2 weeks after therapy started, Curtis called me into his office without the kids. He sat me down and said both children were showing clear signs of emotional distress directly related to their father's behavior and Gloria's presence in their lives. He said Mia was developing anxiety about going home, worried about what Gloria might criticize or throw away next. Jake was having trouble sleeping and had started acting out at school, getting into fights with other kids when he'd never done that before. Curtis said the damage was real and measurable, and it was getting worse the longer they stayed in that environment. He offered to write a professional evaluation for the custody case, a detailed report on what he was seeing and how Lance's choices were harming his children. I agreed immediately, thanking him for being willing to help us. He said he would have the evaluation ready in a week, and that it would state clearly that the children needed to be removed from the situation for their mental health and well-being. That weekend, Lance made his big announcement. He came home Friday night with Gloria and gathered us in the living room like he had important news to share. He said Gloria's lease was up next month, and it didn't make sense for her to find a new place when she was at our house all the time anyway. He said she would be moving in with us permanently and we all needed to accept it. My stomach dropped. I felt the rage build in my chest. I told him absolutely not, that Gloria was not moving into our home where our children lived. Lance looked at me with that cold expression and said I didn't control his life anymore, that the house was his too, and he could have whoever he wanted living there. Gloria smirked at me from behind him, and I knew she had been planning this, pushing for this, wanting to take over our home completely. I didn't argue anymore that night because I knew it wouldn't matter. Instead, I went upstairs and called Jillian, telling her what Lance had just announced. She said this was actually good for our case because it showed Lance prioritizing his mistress over his children's emotional well-being in their own home, and we should let him proceed while we prepared to file for divorce and emergency custody. I grabbed my phone and dialed Jillian's number with shaking hands. She answered on the second ring, and I told her what Lance had just announced about Gloria moving in. There was a pause. Then she said, "That's actually perfect for our case." She explained that Lance moving his mistress into the family home, while the children are living their shows, he's putting his relationship ahead of their emotional well-being. She told me to send her an email that night documenting my objection to Gloria moving in, making it clear I told Lance no and he was doing it anyway. Then she said, "We let him proceed with this terrible decision while we file for divorce and emergency custody." Her voice was calm and strategic, like she had seen this pattern 100 times before. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a little less panicked now that I had a plan. That night, after Lance had gone to bed, I sat down with both kids at the kitchen table. Mia was clutching her stuffed rabbit, and Jake was pulling at a loose thread on his shirt. I told them that Dad had decided Gloria was going to live with us starting next month. Mia's face immediately crumpled, and Jake just stared at the table. I took both of their hands and said that Mommy was going to be making some changes to keep them safe and happy. Mia looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, and asked if we could leave, if we could go somewhere without Gloria. I squeezed her hand and promised her that yes, very soon, we would have our own place where it would be just the three of us. Jake asked if Gloria was going to throw away more of our stuff, and I told him she wouldn't get the chance because we would be gone before she could hurt them anymore. They both hugged me tightly, and I could feel their relief mixed with fear, knowing I needed to act fast. Saturday morning, I started looking for rental houses online while Lance was at the gym with Gloria. I looked for places near the kids' school, so they wouldn't have to change districts and lose their friends. Most places were too expensive or too far, But then I found a small 3-bedroom house just 4 blocks from the school. The rent was more than I was paying now, but I could afford it if I picked up extra shifts at my job. I called the landlord and scheduled a viewing for that afternoon. The house was older and needed some repairs, but it had a yard where Jake could practice soccer, and a spare room Mia could use for her art. I filled out the application on the spot, and put down a deposit using money from my savings account. The landlord said I could move in within the month, and I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Tuesday morning, Lance left for work early, and 3 hours later, Gloria showed up with suitcases and boxes. She didn't knock. She just used the key Lance gave her and walked in like she owned the place. I watched from the kitchen as she took over the guest room, hanging her clothes in the closet and putting her toiletries in the bathroom. Then she started rearranging the living room furniture without asking anyone. She moved the couch to a different wall and switched the coffee table to the middle. She took down the kids' art that was displayed on the walls, the drawings and paintings they were so proud of, and tossed them into a garbage bag. In their place, she hung her own pieces, abstract paintings with harsh colors that felt cold and unwelcoming. When Mia got home from school and saw her butterfly painting in the trash, she started to cry. Gloria told her the house needed to look more mature now that she was living here, that kids' art was for the fridge, not for display. I fished the drawings out of the trash after Gloria went upstairs and hid them in my closet. Thursday afternoon, Jake came home from school with red-rimmed eyes and tear tracks on his face. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me some kids were teasing him because his dad had a girlfriend. Apparently, their parents had been talking about seeing Lance and Gloria around town together, holding hands at restaurants and kissing in parking lots. The other kids called Jake's family weird, and asked if his mom knew his dad had a new wife. Jake said he tried to ignore them, but they wouldn't stop, and he ended up pushing one of the boys during recess. I held him tight while he cried into my shoulder. When Lance got home, I told him what happened, and he barely looked up from his phone. He said kids are mean sometimes and Jake needed to toughen up, that he couldn't let other people's opinions bother him. Jake started crying harder and ran to his room. Lance just shrugged and went to find Gloria. I sat at my laptop that night and wrote down every detail of what happened with Jake. I wrote down the names of the kids who teased him, what they said, and how Lance dismissed his pain. I described Jake's tears and his fear of going back to school. I emailed it all to Jillian with the subject line "Damage to Children's Reputation." She responded within an hour saying, "This is exactly what we need. Proof that Lance's public affair is harming the children's social lives and emotional health." She said she was ready to file the divorce papers whenever I gave the word. I told her I needed 1 more week to get the rental house ready and move some things over gradually so Lance wouldn't notice. She agreed and said to keep documenting everything until then. Saturday afternoon, Gloria announced she wanted to give Mia an art lesson. She set up supplies in the dining room and called for Mia to come down. Mia stayed in her room with the door shut. Gloria knocked and said she was just trying to help, that Mia had potential but needed proper instruction. Mia yelled through the door that she didn't want Gloria to teach her anything. Gloria's face turned red, and she stormed off to find Lance. 20 minutes later, Lance came upstairs and told Mia she was being disrespectful to someone who was trying to help her improve. Mia said she liked her art the way it was and didn't want to change. Lance said she was grounded from her art supplies for a week, that she needed to learn gratitude and respect. Mia screamed that she hated Gloria and slammed the door. I stood in the hallway with my phone in my pocket, recording the entire conversation. After Lance left, I took a picture of Mia crying on her bed and the empty space where her art supplies used to be. Monday morning, I had a consultation with Curtis for both kids' therapy session. After meeting with them separately, he called me into his office alone. His expression was serious as he told me both children were exhibiting significant anxiety and depression related to the home situation. He said Mia was developing a fear of coming home because she worried about what Gloria might criticize or throw away next. Jake was having trouble sleeping and had started acting out at school when he'd never had behavioral issues before. Curtis said the damage was real and was getting worse the longer they stayed in that environment. He offered to write a professional evaluation for the custody case, a detailed report on what he was seeing and how Lance's choices were harming his children. I agreed immediately, and he said he would have it ready in a week. He also said he was willing to testify in court, if needed, about the psychological harm they were suffering. I started picking up every extra shift I could get at work, covering for other people and staying late whenever possible. At night, after Lance was asleep, Win would come over and help me pack boxes. We worked in silence, filling boxes with clothes and toys and kitchen items that Lance wouldn't notice were missing. I would take them over to the rental house in small loads, setting up the kids' rooms first so they would have familiar things waiting for them. Win kept telling me how proud she was of me for protecting my kids, that I was doing the right thing, even though it was terrifying. She helped me move my clothes and books, picture frames and dishes, all the personal items that make a house feel like a home. Lance never noticed the gradual emptying of our shared space because he was too busy with Gloria. Friday night, Gloria hosted a dinner party at our house for her art teacher friends. She sent out invitations and planned the menu without ever asking me. 6 people showed up carrying bottles of wine and acting as if this was Gloria's home. She introduced Lance as her partner while I was standing right there in my own kitchen. The guests looked uncomfortable, glancing between me and Gloria with confused expressions. One woman asked how long Lance and I had been separated, and Gloria just laughed, saying they were working on that part. I smiled politely and served appetizers, making mental notes of how Gloria was already playing the wife in front of witnesses. I took pictures of the party, of Gloria playing hostess in my home, of Lance with his arm around her as she showed off her artwork on my walls. It all went into the file for Jillian. One of Gloria's art teacher friends found me in the kitchen while I was refilling wine glasses. She touched my arm gently and leaned in close. She told me she was so sorry for what I was going through. She said Gloria had always been selfish even back in college when they were roommates. She mentioned that Gloria went after her boyfriend once and didn't even feel bad about it afterward. She said she wasn't surprised that Gloria would go after a married man with kids because Gloria only thinks about what makes Gloria happy. I thanked her quietly and asked if she would be willing to share that information with my lawyer if needed. She agreed and wrote her phone number on a napkin, telling me to call anytime. She said someone needed to stand up for those kids because they deserved better. I folded the napkin carefully and put it in my pocket, adding it to my mental list of evidence for Jillian. 3 days later, I was at home when Jake's soccer coach called my cell phone. His voice sounded worried as he asked if I could come down to the field right away. I drove there in 10 minutes, my stomach tight with fear about what had happened. When I arrived, Jake was sitting on the bench with tears streaming down his face while the other kids ran drills. The coach pulled me aside and explained what happened. Jake had seen his dad's car pull into the parking lot during warm-ups and got so excited that he ran toward it. But Lance was just dropping Gloria off at the gym next door and didn't even glance at the field. Jake stood there and watched his father drive away without acknowledging him. Then Jake just broke down crying right there on the field and couldn't stop. The coach had to pull him from practice because he was too upset to play. I sat next to Jake on the bench and put my arm around him. He buried his face in my shoulder and sobbed. I explained quietly to the coach that we were going through a difficult divorce and his father had been prioritizing other things over the children. The coach nodded with understanding and concern in his eyes. The coach walked us to my car after Jake had calmed down enough to leave. He mentioned that he'd noticed big changes in Jake over the past few months. He said Jake used to be one of the most spirited kids on the team, always the first at practice and giving it his all. Now, Jake barely participated and seemed sad most of the time. He said Jake's performance had dropped significantly, and his enthusiasm for soccer had basically disappeared. The coach asked carefully if there was anything he could do to help. I told him honestly that I was building a custody case, and any documentation of how Lance's behavior affected Jake would be helpful. The coach said he would write up a detailed statement about the changes he'd observed in Jake's behavior and attitude. He mentioned specific examples of Jake's performance decline and emotional state during practices and games. He said he would email it to me by tomorrow because kids shouldn't have to go through this kind of pain. I thanked him with tears in my eyes and drove Jake home. The next morning, I called Jillian's office and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. I spent 2 hours organizing everything into folders, Curtis's psychological evaluations of both children with detailed notes on their anxiety and depression, the coach's statement about Jake's performance decline and emotional breakdown, my documentation of every incident, every missed game, every cruel comment Gloria made. The recording of Lance saying Gloria was more important than the kids, photos of Gloria throwing away the kids' art and taking over our home, screenshots of texts and emails, the contact information for Gloria's friend who witnessed her selfish behavior for years. I put everything into a large envelope and drove to Jillian's office. She met me in the conference room, and I spread it all out on the table. She picked up each piece of evidence carefully, reading through Curtis's evaluations first. Her expression grew more serious as she reviewed the coach's statement and listened to the recording. She looked at the photos of the kids' art in the trash and of Gloria's dinner party in our home. She read my detailed timeline of events with dates and times. When she finished reviewing everything, she sat back in her chair. Jillian told me we had a very strong case for primary custody with limited visitation for Lance. She said the combination of professional evaluations, witness statements, recorded admissions, and a documented pattern of neglect created a picture that family court judges take very seriously. She explained that Lance prioritizing his mistress over his children's emotional well-being, combined with Gloria's cruelty toward them, gave us solid grounds to request supervised visits only. She said we could also file for a restraining order keeping Gloria away from the children during any visitation time Lance received. She started drafting the divorce papers right there while I waited, typing quickly on her laptop. She included requests for full physical custody, child support based on Lance's real income, and specific provisions protecting the children from Gloria's influence. She printed everything and showed me each section, explaining what it meant and why it mattered. She said she would file the papers this week and have Lance served. She told me to be prepared for him to react badly but to remain calm and document anything he did. His behavior, she reminded me, would only help our case. Friday morning came, and Lance left for work at his usual time. I waited until his car disappeared down the street before I started moving. I took the kids to school normally, hugging them both extra tight before they went inside. Then I drove back home and loaded the last few boxes into my car. Wynn met me at the house with her truck, and we worked quickly, loading the remaining furniture and belongings. We took the kids' beds, their dressers, the kitchen table that Lance never noticed was mine from before we were married. We packed all the personal items, family photos, anything that made this house feel like ours. The rental house already had most of our things from the gradual moves over the past few weeks. This was just the final load, the last pieces of our life here. I left the divorce papers on the kitchen counter where Lance would see them immediately when he got home. I wrote a short note on top, saying we were done and he could contact me only through Jillian. I took my phone to the carrier store and got a new number, giving the new contact information only to Jillian, the school, and a few trusted friends. I blocked Lance's number on my old phone before canceling the service. Then I drove to the rental house and started unpacking. Jillian called me less than an hour after Lance would have gotten home. She sounded calm, but I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. She said Lance had called her office, furious and yelling, demanding to know where his children were. Apparently, he threatened to call the police and report me for kidnapping. Jillian calmly told him that his children were safe with their mother, who actually prioritizes their well-being over her romantic relationships. She informed him that he would be receiving official notice of the divorce and could respond through his own counsel. She said he needed to communicate only through legal channels from now on. She told me he hung up on her after screaming that I would regret this. She said his reaction was perfect for our case because it showed his focus was on control and anger, not concern for his children. She reminded me not to respond to any attempts he made to contact me directly. Everything, she said, goes through her office now. I left early to pick the kids up from school, wanting to be there the moment they walked out. When they saw me waiting by the car, they ran over, their backpacks bouncing. I drove them to our new house, taking the long way so they could see it was still in the same neighborhood, close to their school and friends. When we pulled into the driveway, I told them this was our new home. I opened the front door and let them explore. Mia found her room first and she actually cried when she saw it, happy tears this time. Her bed was made exactly how she likes it, with her favorite blankets and stuffed animals. Her art supplies were organized on shelves along one wall. Her drawings were hung on a bulletin board, the ones Gloria had thrown out that I had saved from the trash. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. Jake discovered his room next and immediately noticed his soccer trophies on display, and his posters on the walls. He asked if we could put his drawings back on the fridge now. I told him of course we could, and we walked to the kitchen together. He taped up 3 pictures he'd made at school that week, stepping back to admire them with a huge smile. That weekend we stayed in our pajamas until noon and watched movies on the couch. I made pancakes for breakfast, and we ate them sitting on the floor because I hadn't bought a coffee table yet. We played board games that had been packed away for months because Gloria said they were childish and cluttered up the house. We ordered pizza for dinner and ate it straight from the box. There was no Gloria criticizing everything, no Lance ignoring them while he texted his mistress, no tension or walking on eggshells or wondering what would be thrown away next. It was just the 3 of us, comfortable and safe in our own space. The kids were visibly calmer, their shoulders relaxed instead of hunched up by their ears. Mia laughed at something in the movie we were watching. Jake made jokes during the board game, and he didn't look sad when he talked about soccer. On Sunday afternoon, Jake actually laughed at something funny I said, a real belly laugh, and I realized I hadn't heard him laugh like that in months, maybe since before Gloria entered our lives. Monday morning, Jillian called to tell me that Lance's lawyer had contacted her office, demanding immediate visitation with his children. Jillian responded by sending over our entire evidence package, along with Curtis's professional recommendation that any visits be supervised and that Gloria must be completely absent until the children were emotionally stable. She included the psychological evaluations, the coach's statement, the recording, the photos, everything that showed the damage Lance's choices had caused. Lance's lawyer went quiet after receiving the package. Jillian said he hadn't responded in 3 days, which meant he was reviewing the evidence and realizing how bad Lance's case looked. She expected him to come back with a much more reasonable proposal once he understood what we had. She said most lawyers recognize when their client has destroyed their own case and try to negotiate the best possible settlement instead of going to trial. She told me to be patient and let the evidence do its work. She sounded confident we would get the custody arrangement we wanted because Lance had given us everything we needed to protect our children. Tuesday morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with a text from a number I didn't recognize at first. It was my old number, the one Lance still had. The text was from Gloria and it was nasty. She called me bitter and said the kids would get over it as soon as they saw how happy their father was with her. She said I was being selfish and that the children deserved to see what true love looked like. She actually wrote that Lance was better off without me dragging him down. I screenshotted the message immediately and forwarded it to Jillian with a note saying, "Gloria just gave us more evidence." Jillian responded in 10 minutes, saying it was perfect proof of Gloria's lack of concern for the children's well-being. She said any decent adult would prioritize the children's feelings, not send angry texts to their mother, and she added it to our evidence file. That afternoon, I took both kids to their therapy session with Curtis. He met with them separately, as always, Mia first and then Jake. After both sessions, Curtis asked to speak with me privately in his office. He told me both children were already showing improvement after just a week away from the toxic environment. Mia was drawing again, creating pictures that showed happiness instead of the dark scribbles she'd been making before. And Jake was sleeping through the night without nightmares for the first time in months. Curtis said the change was remarkable given the short period of time. He explained that removing them from the constant stress of Gloria's presence and Lance's rejection had allowed them to start healing. He was documenting all of it in his notes for court purposes and told me I had made the right decision in getting them out of there when I did. Wednesday morning, the school principal called and asked me to come in for a meeting. I dropped the kids off in their classes and went to the office, worried something was wrong. The principal had noticed the change of address in the system and wanted to make sure the kids were okay. I explained the situation briefly, keeping it professional, and she nodded as if she wasn't surprised. Then she mentioned she'd had concerns about Gloria's boundary issues at the school. Apparently, Gloria had been trying to insert herself into school events and parent communications inappropriately. The principal said Gloria would show up at dismissal, even when it wasn't her day, trying to pick up the kids, and would join parent meetings she wasn't invited to, acting as if she had authority over students who weren't even in her class. Other teachers had complained that Gloria was overstepping boundaries and making parents uncomfortable. The principal had been keeping notes because several families had mentioned concerns, and she offered to provide a statement about Gloria's inappropriate behavior at school and Lance's absence from school activities and parent-teacher meetings. She pulled out a file documenting every meeting Lance had missed, every event he hadn't attended, every time Gloria had caused an issue. She said several teachers had noticed the children's distress over the past few months and their improvement since the separation, and she was willing to document all of it officially for court purposes. I thanked her and immediately messaged Jillian about this new evidence. Jillian replied, "This is exactly what we need because it shows a pattern of Gloria's poor judgment and Lance's negligence from objective, professional observers." Thursday afternoon, Jillian called with an update. Lance had finally agreed to supervise visitation at a neutral location without Gloria present. Jillian said this showed he knew his case was weak, because a parent confident in their parenting wouldn't agree to such restrictions. The first visit was scheduled for Saturday at a family visitation center, where a professional supervisor would observe their interaction with the children and fill out reports. Jillian explained that these supervisors are trained to spot concerning behaviors, and their reports carry weight in court. She told me to prepare the kids but not to pressure them in any way. If they didn't want to go, it was their choice, and the supervisor would document their reluctance. Friday night, I sat down with both kids after dinner to prepare them for seeing their father. I explained that it would be just him, no Gloria, and they could leave if they felt uncomfortable. The supervisor was there to make sure everyone was safe and respected. Mia stared at her hands for a long time before saying she wanted to go because she missed her dad, even though he hurt her. My heart broke hearing her say that, but I told her it was okay to miss him and that it showed she had a good heart. Jake said he would go if Mia was going because he didn't want her to be alone with Dad. I told them both how proud I was of their bravery and resilience. Saturday morning, I drove the kids to the visitation center, a plain building with a waiting room and several observation rooms. The supervisor greeted us and explained the process to the kids in a gentle voice. She led them into the visitation room while I waited outside. 2 hours later, the supervisor brought them back out early. The kids looked disappointed and tired. The supervisor asked to speak with me privately and handed me a copy of her report. According to the report, Lance spent most of the time on his phone, texting someone, presumably Gloria. When Jake tried to tell him about making the select soccer team, Lance interrupted to complain about the divorce and blame me for everything. He told the children I was being unreasonable and keeping them from him on purpose. He said Gloria missed them and couldn't wait to see them again. The kids asked to leave after 30 minutes of the scheduled 2 hours. The supervisor noted that Lance showed no awareness of his children's emotional needs and seemed more focused on his own grievances. Monday morning, Jillian called after receiving the supervisor's report. She was using it to argue for reduced visitation frequency until Lance could demonstrate proper parental behavior. She had filed a motion that morning requesting visits be reduced to once a month instead of twice a month, until Lance completed parenting classes and showed improvement. Lance's lawyer pushed back, but weakly, clearly aware that his client was sabotaging his own case with his behavior. Jillian sounded confident that the judge would agree with our position, given the documented pattern of poor parenting and Lance's self-centered focus. Tuesday afternoon, Wynn called me sounding excited. She'd heard from mutual friends that Lance's relationship with Gloria was already showing strain. Apparently, Gloria was upset that he had kids and custody issues getting in the way of their lifestyle. She'd been complaining to friends that she didn't sign up for this drama, and Lance came with too much baggage. The friend said Gloria seemed ready to move on to someone less complicated, someone without kids and an ex-wife. Wynn thought Gloria might leave Lance soon, which would be poetic justice after everything he'd sacrificed for her. I tried not to feel satisfied by that, but I couldn't help it. 2 months passed with the kids settling into our new routine and Lance having minimal, supervised visits that continued to go poorly. The mediation session finally arrived. I met Jillian at her office, and we drove to the mediator's building together. Lance arrived 20 minutes late, which the mediator noted with obvious disapproval. He kept checking his phone throughout the meeting, typing out messages and barely paying attention. The mediator asked him to put his phone away, and he did, but he kept glancing down at it. We sat across from each other with our lawyers on either side, and the mediator at the head of the table. The mediator reviewed the custody proposal, and asked if we were ready to discuss the arrangements. Lance immediately jumped in, saying he wanted more time with his kids. Jillian pulled out the folder I recognized from our prep meetings and started laying documents on the table. She didn't rush. She just placed each piece of evidence carefully where the mediator could see it. The visitation center supervisor's reports went down first, then Curtis's psychological evaluations of both children, then the soccer coach's statement about Jake's performance decline and emotional state. She added the principal's documentation of Gloria's inappropriate behavior at school and Lance's absence from parent-teacher conferences and school events. Finally, she placed my detailed logs with dates and times and exact quotes, including the recording where Lance said Gloria was more important than our children. The mediator picked up each document and read it while Lance shifted in his chair and checked his phone again. His lawyer leaned over to look at the evidence, and I saw his expression change from confident to concerned. Jillian sat next to me and folded her hands on the table, not saying anything yet because the documents spoke for themselves. Lance finally looked up from his phone and noticed everyone looking at the papers spread across the table. He asked what all that was, and Jillian said it was the evidence of his parenting behavior for the last 6 months. The mediator finished reading the last page and set it down carefully on the table. Then she looked directly at Lance with an expression I couldn't quite read, but it was definitely not friendly. She asked Lance if he would like to respond to any of the documented incidents before they proceeded. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. Then he said the documents made things look worse than they were. The mediator asked him to explain how telling his children that his mistress was more important than them could possibly sound better in context. Lance's face flushed, and he said that's not what he meant, that I must have recorded it wrong or taken it out of context. Jillian reached into her bag and pulled out a small audio recorder, asking if he would like to hear the actual audio. His lawyer put a hand on Lance's arm and shook his head slightly, clearly telling him to stop talking. The mediator wrote something on her notepad, and the sound of her pen scratching on the paper filled the silent room. She looked up and addressed Lance directly, saying that his behavior had been detrimental to his children, based on the professional evaluations and documented evidence. She asked him, "What do you believe is more important? Your relationship with Gloria? Or your relationship with your children?" The room went completely silent, and I could hear Lance's breathing from across the table. He just sat there, frozen, and I could see him actually thinking about his answer as if it were a difficult question. The pause stretched for 5 seconds, then 10, then 15, and in that growing silence, everyone in the room understood exactly what his hesitation meant. His own lawyer looked away and shook his head, clearly disgusted with his client. The mediator made another note on her paperwork, and the scratching sound seemed louder this time, more final. Jillian glanced at me, and I saw the faintest hint of satisfaction in her expression because we both knew Lance had just destroyed any chance he had. He finally said he loved his children, but Gloria made him happy, and he couldn't just end that relationship. The mediator asked if he understood that his children's therapist had documented significant emotional distress caused directly by Gloria's presence in their lives. Lance said the kids would adjust once they got to know her better, that they were just being difficult because I had turned them against her. The mediator closed the folder in front of her with a firm snap that made Lance jump a little. She told us she had reviewed all the evidence and listened to both sides, and she was ready to make her recommendation to the court. Lance sat up straighter as if he thought this might still go his way somehow. The mediator said she was recommending primary physical custody to me, with supervised visitation for Lance every other week. Lance started to protest, but she held up a hand and kept talking. The visits were contingent upon him completing parenting classes and individual therapy to address his priorities and behavioral patterns. She added that Gloria was to have no contact with the children until they were much older and could choose for themselves whether they wanted a relationship with her, based on the documented emotional harm her presence had caused. Lance's lawyer scribbled all of that down and then told Lance quietly that he should accept this recommendation. Lance asked why he should accept anything, that he wanted to fight this in court. His lawyer explained that a judge would likely be even less sympathetic given the evidence, and that fighting it would cost a lot of money and probably result in an even worse outcome. The lawyer said the words carefully as if he were talking to a child who didn't understand consequences. Lance looked at me from across the table, and his expression was pure rage, as if I were the villain in this situation instead of the person protecting our children from his selfish choices. The mediator asked if he was willing to sign the agreement, or if he wanted to proceed to trial. His lawyer nudged him, and Lance took the pen sharply, signing his name on the paperwork with harsh strokes that nearly tore the paper. He stared at me the whole time, and I met his eyes without looking away because I had nothing to be ashamed of. The mediator collected the signed documents and told us the court would review and finalize everything in the coming months. We all stood up, and Lance stormed out without saying a word to anyone. His lawyer apologized to the mediator and Jillian before following his client out. Jillian packed up her documents and told me this went about as well as we could have hoped. I felt the relief wash over me, but also the exhaustion from holding myself together throughout the meeting. 3 months of paperwork and court proceedings passed, and the divorce was finally finalized with the custody agreement exactly as the mediator recommended. I have primary custody. Lance has supervised visits twice a month, and is required to pay child support that actually reflects his real income now that the court has examined his finances properly. The judge added the requirement that Gloria is to have no contact with the children, which is written into the official court order. I received the final papers in the mail and sat at my kitchen table reading them, making sure everything was correct. 2 weeks after the custody agreement was finalized, Wynne called, excited with a piece of gossip she'd heard. She told me Gloria broke up with Lance, apparently deciding that a man who lost his family for her, but then resented all the consequences wasn't worth the trouble. Wynne's friend had seen Gloria at a restaurant with a different guy, some architect with no kids and no baggage. I tried not to feel satisfied by that, but I failed completely because the justice seemed too perfect. Lance gave up his family for someone who didn't even want him once reality set in. A few days later, I received an unexpected call from Oscar, Lance's boss at work. He apologized for not realizing what Lance had been doing during work hours and how it had affected our family. Oscar mentioned that Lance's job performance had declined significantly in recent months, and there had been several complaints about his unprofessional behavior with Gloria at company events. He said it carefully, as if he were trying to be diplomatic, but wanted me to know that Lance's choices were catching up with him professionally as well. I thanked Oscar for calling and said I appreciated his concern for our family. For months after the separation, both kids are doing so much better. Mia is creating art again without anyone criticizing her work or throwing it away, and she even entered a school art competition that she's excited about. Jake made the select soccer team and plays with genuine joy instead of that anxious look he used to have while scanning the stands for his father. They still have hard days where they miss having their dad around, but the constant anxiety that used to fill our home is completely gone. Curtis tells me in our follow-up meetings that both children are making excellent progress in therapy and showing real resilience. Lance's supervised visits continue to be an issue because he frequently cancels, shows up late when he does come, and still seems more focused on his phone than on his children. The supervisor's reports document his continued failure to prioritize his time with Jake and Mia, noting that he spends the visits complaining about the divorce instead of engaging with them. Curtis mentions that the kids are becoming more ambivalent about seeing their father, asking less frequently when the next visit is, and showing less disappointment when Lance cancels. 2 months after the last visitation report, my boss calls me into her office and tells me I'm being promoted to senior coordinator with a 20% raise and better benefits. I sign the paperwork right there, already calculating in my head what this means for the kids. That weekend, I take Mia to the art supply store and let her pick out professional grade paints and brushes, the kind Gloria said she wasn't ready for. Jake gets new soccer cleats, and we sign him up for the travel team he's been wanting to try out for. We stop for ice cream afterward and Wynne meets us there. She looks at me and says I'm glowing now that the weight of that terrible marriage is off my shoulders. She's right. I feel lighter than I have in years, like I can finally breathe without that constant pressure on my chest. The kids are laughing about their sprinkles and I realize this is what normal feels like, what our lives should have been all along. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, we're having breakfast on a Saturday morning when Mia puts her fork down and tells me she's glad we left. She says she can be herself now without Gloria criticizing everything she does, without worrying that her art isn't good enough or sophisticated enough. Jake agrees, adding that he likes our house better because it feels like a home, Not like a museum where he has to be quiet and careful all the time. I look at my kids, sitting there in their pajamas with syrup on their faces and messy hair, completely relaxed and happy, and I realize they are genuinely okay for the first time since Gloria entered our lives. They still have moments where they miss having their dad around, but the constant fear and anxiety that used to fill every room are completely gone. 3 weeks later, Jillian calls me about paperwork from Lance's lawyer. Lance is petitioning to modify the custody agreement to reduce his visitation time, because keeping up with the current schedule is too difficult for him. I read through the motion, and it's full of excuses about his work commitments and personal obligations, nothing about what's best for the children. Jillian deals with it efficiently, filing our response, which points out his pattern of canceled visits, and the supervisor's reports documenting his lack of engagement. The court hearing takes 15 minutes. The judge reviews the evidence, looks at Lance with obvious disapproval, and reduces his visits to once a month. When I tell the kids that night, expecting sadness or disappointment, they just nod and Jake asks if we can make popcorn and watch a movie. Their relief, instead of sadness, tells me everything I need to know about how they really feel about seeing their father. We're building a good life now. The 3 of us eat dinner together every night at our little kitchen table, with no Gloria redecorating our space or throwing away their art. I help with homework while they tell me about their day, really tell me without fear of being criticized or dismissed. We go to Jake's soccer games, and I'm the loudest mom in the stands, cheering every time he touches the ball. Mia's art is all over our fridge and walls, her drawings getting better and better as her confidence grows back. On weekends, we do things we actually enjoy instead of cultural enrichment we're supposed to appreciate. The kids are healing, slowly but surely, laughing more and relaxing into just being kids again. I'm stronger than I ever thought possible, capable of providing for them and protecting them in ways I didn't know I had in me. We are finally free from someone who proved over and over again that he never deserved us in the first place. And every day that freedom feels more real and more true.